Pastor, Viana and me have a few questions. And
yes, that is wonderful.
and
We should always discuss.
is it
Yes,
okay if we just uh, uh, tell our question, everything, and then you just
yes.
answer later?
This is the normal arrangement. Always like that. We start with questions and continue with the text.
Okay, so we do not do like I ask and then you answer and then I ask again. Perhaps we just ask everything and then you just answer
Okay,
whatever you
okay,
think appropriate. Okay,
okay.
Johan
Now
sudah
is the time.
direkam ya.
So please let us start recording also.
Johan sudah recording ya.
Yes, Pastor.
Okay.
He recorded.
Dan recorded.
Okay, Viana,
So
you ask first. I will ask later after you.
okay, Sienna,
Hi,
please
Pastor.
come.
Yeah, Pastor. I would like you to elaborate more about some uh, istilah apa ya, Pak ya?
Some terms.
Some terms, yeah, that you always use. I still cannot get what's the meanings of those terms. The first is continuity of the mind.
Continuity of the mind, yeah?
Yeah, and then
So
differentiation of the. I would like you to elaborate more about
okay.
what's the
So
meaning of the continuity of the mind, and then
okay,
and then the differentiation of the non-dualistic.
okay. Very good. So the continuation of the mind is you and is me and is all beings. We are just continuity of the mind. And because we don't see it, so we are attached to person, we are attached to things, because we don't see that this continuity of mind is the continuity of the impermanent mind. And based on continuity, today we will explain how it works. Before, we were explaining from the aspect of no time. That means how uh, the kleshas, how the defilements arise, where originally there were no defilements, how they rise, but without a sequence. Now, in today's lecture, we will explain the sequence. So before we were explaining from the point of view of suchness, from the point of view of enlightened aspect of alaya. Now we will explain from the point of view of non-enlightened aspect of alaya, which is ignorance. Due to ignorance, our mind is moving. My mind has no nature of moving. We have explained the last lesson. The nature of the mind does not move. What moves are the objects. The objects of the mind always moving. Remember the story of Huineng, two monks arguing if the flag is moving or the wind is moving. Huineng answers, this is a Zen answer, not the wind is moving, not the flag is moving, but your mind is moving there. So our mind is moving, and that is the aspect of ignorance. We have not penetrated the true nature of the mind. True nature of the mind is, in this tradition, Buddha. It is the primordial wisdom. We don't have primordial wisdom, so we let the mind follow the movement. Because we follow the movement, our mind has, we have explained, our mind becomes alaya, store consciousness, which has the aspect of enlightenment, jue, an aspect of non-enlightenment. because of the aspect of enlightenment, we go into the process of enlightening, which is called in our text Shetje. So Shetje means we go back to the original nature of the mind. Original nature of the mind is never moving, but the that mind which is always moving is, so to say, powered. Can you listen to me? Some somebody is talking, they have to stop. So our mind is moving, and because we don't have enough awareness, we don't see that it is moving unconsciously, not consciously. When we know it's moving unconsciously, so we have access to the non-thinking mind. This non-thinking mind can exist in movement, but it also exists in no movement. But when the movement starts, this movement starts from the continuity of the mind. When this continuity of the mind becomes our the following our thoughts, then we are clinging to the persons and to things. So this, then our mind becomes the mano vigyana, the mind dominated by the six senses. When the mind is dominated by the six senses, then we get attachment and we get clinging to concepts. When we get attachment and clinging to concepts, we create a new karma, positive or negative, and then we are bound by this karma, positive and negative, and so to say, we continue in the samsaric mind, which is moving due to ignorance. So in today's lecture, we will come to how this mind is moving based on manas, and how, which is individualizing mind based on thinking, Liang, according to Xuanzang. And due to thinking, then we cling to the objects. This is a function of the differentiating mind. The mind which is based on thinking that the objects that we experience are the real objects, that they are really there. But they are not there, they just appear there to be on the base of the continuity mind. When you practice the Theravada style of meditation, you want to get the pure mind, and you want, so to say, to destroy the mind which is clinging. But in the non-dualistic meditation, you don't want to destroy the mind which is clinging. You want to understand this mind which is clinging based on its true nature. So the ignorance in the non-dualistic thinking is not true. That is why ignorance in our case, when we are based on the worldly reality, ignorance is without beginning. But it can have an end when we penetrate the true nature of dependent origination. The true nature of dependent origination is not destroying the base, the five aggregates, but to understand that in reality, nothing is real, not nirvana is real, not the ignorance is real. And this, what is real, is the true nature of the mind. That is why Chittamatrata, the three spheres of consciousness, the sphere based on 5 senses, the sphere based on subtle images, sphere without images, they are all illusionary. Xu Wei. Wei Xin Xu Wei. This is Chittamatrata. Now, there is a difference between the Chittamatrata, the Weishe, as explained in the Xuanzang tradition, in the Yujie Tilun, in the Jieshen meeting, Sandi Nirmochana Sutra. In this tradition, this suchness, which is called Zhenru in Chinese, the suchness never changes. That which is changing is to be realized, to be not real, and that it does not change really. The suchness never changes. In this tradition, non-dualistic tradition, the Yogacara is non-dualistic tradition, but in this tradition, the ignorance and the wisdom, they exist side by side. Ignorance is perfuming the wisdom, and wisdom is perfuming the ignorance. This is the condition of us, sentient beings. But this all happened, what we do not see, this all happened in one mind. Therefore, we started with the explanation that the Dharma is just one mind. And this one mind is identified with Ru Lai Zhang, the Tathagata Garbha, the store of Tathagata, which is hidden in the mind of sentient beings, in our mind. That's why we don't understand that even when we are ignorant, this nature of the mind never changes. That's why we ended last lesson explaining that there is, we see reality, we non-enlightened beings see reality in terms of either sameness or difference. Seeing as a sameness is like all pottery is made of clay. All phenomena are made of suchness. Suchness does not change, but the phenomena always changes. But the phenomena always change when there is an object. And this object comes from the moving mind. When the mind moves, it has not nature of moving, but it is the ignorance which moves it. And this is what we're going to discuss today. Today we're going to discuss the causes and conditions of the impermanent mind. That is us. We are nothing else but impermanent mind. But because we do not see it, so we believe this impermanent mind has a real self, and what it experiences is real. But nothing is real in non-dualistic tradition. We are living from the very beginning in an illusion. Because we live in illusion, we are taking west to be east and east to be west, instead of understanding the true nature of the mind. We try to find the true nature in that which is actually always on the move due to ignorance. So this is very important for understanding the non-dualistic tradition, no matter whether Chinese or Tibetan. So try to think about it and make it clear in your mind and in your practice. See, when the mind does not move, what is its conditioning? When it starts moving, from where does it move? This is very important to understand. It moves from this continuity of the mind, which are we. But because we do not understand, we identify with this continuity of the mind. The disciples, they practice on the base of correct differentiation. They don't identify with the impure mind, they identify with the pure mind. And the impure mind they want to destroy in order to make their mind pure. This is perfectly all right. This is very wonderful, but this is not yet from the point of view of non-dualistic realization. It is not yet a complete realization because they have not understood that this continuity of the mind is very, very subtle. And unless we penetrate it, we cannot get the perfect realization, which is beyond differentiation between existence, non-existent, samsara, nirvana. And so this true nature of the mind is everlasting. It cannot change. But that which is changing is the mind which then identify with the object. When we identify with the object, we identify with our karma. When we identify with our karma, then this subtle potential of the continuity of the mind is not interrupted. So we don't live in the nature of the mind which is not changing. So it is explained even in Theravada scriptures. Even the Arahat, he does not leave his previous habits, which are the bijas, impregnation of the mind, but the Buddha is free from differentiation, so he is free from habits also. So he has attained the true nature of the mind, so he does not need any investigation, he does not need any attention to know what is happening. But in our case, we also have to study like this. It means when we are doing something, it does not mean that we have to think. When we are cleaning our room, it does not mean that we have to think. When we are meditating, it does not mean we have to think. When we are working in the field or working in the computer, it does not mean that we have to think. That's why suchness in Chinese is called Zhenru. This Zhen never changes, but Ru always changing. But when the mind changes, it never loses its true nature. It's Zhen. Therefore, wonderful Chinese translation of suchness, Zhenru. This Zhen, the true nature of the mind, never changes. The Ru, when it is changing, it never loses its true nature. But its objects are always changing, and because we identify with the objects, we, so to say, are subjected to our continuity mind and subjected to our thoughts. Very wonderful explanation, very deep. It takes time, it takes a lot of effort, but it is a most wonderful approach to meditation if one understands it. If one does not understand it, one gets easily stuck. So that is why it is a challenge to practice the non-dualistic approach nowadays very popular, especially in the West. We want a quick result. So everything is just space, nothing exists, but it is just our own imagination. We are still attached to this continuity of the mind, from which the idea of ourselves and idea of the world comes. So I hope now it is getting more clear. Any other questions? We will all discuss it again and again. We have seen this scripture puts emphasis on understanding. So we are learning to see things from the perspective of no time, and then again from the perspective of time. We see things from the perspective of non-enlightenment, then again from the perspective of enlightenment, and again from the perspective of non-enlightenment, and again from the perspective of enlightenment. Now we are coming from the perspective of non-enlightenment to the perspective of from the perspective of enlightenment, because we did not explain in time. Now we are explaining in time, and it is perspective of non-enlightenment. So before we have not explained the causes and conditions of the being in samsara, in being of the impermanent mind. Now, in this today's talk, we start with explaining the causes and conditions of our being in samsara. Being in samsara is being in a non-enlightened mind. And this non-enlightened mind and enlightened mind, they exist together in alaya consciousness. Alaya consciousness is a consciousness which dwells, literally which sticks. Alaya is from Sanskrit li, which means to stick. We are sticking to the world because we are sticking to our consciousness. And we don't see that our consciousness is simply a continuity of impermanence. So we identify with this consciousness as being the person, and so we are attached to our desires and to our views. And so we continue in samsara. Okay? Now Agus has some question.
Yes, Pastor. Pastor, please correct me and then perhaps please comment. I read from the Japanese translator, and a few scholars said about the title itself, The Awakening Faith in Mahayana. A few scholars said that although in the part of part one, the intention for composing the text, the author mentioned in the point number 6 about his intention. He mentioned about Hinayana. So he want to teach this treatise for correcting the Hinayana, but actually the title itself, when it mentioned about Mahayana, some scholars have opinion that actually it is should be awakening faith in the absolute. So the title actually Mahayana, it is not as a sect, but it is more like a mode or type of so
Actually, we have he explains in the beginning, the Dharma is one mind. This one mind is always there, but it is not absolute in the sense absolute is something that never changes. But when things are changing, they become Zhu. When they are not changing, they become Jen. In the case of Buddha, who is at the beginning, that's why process of enlightenment is called Shijie, going back to the beginning. That's why Huineng explains Pen Lai Wu Yi Wu, He Chu, He Chu Re Chen Ai. Originally, there was nothing. So where can the dust, where can the ignorance settle on? That on which it settles does not exist from the very beginning. So we have to go back to the beginning. But in order to go back to the beginning, we have to understand how
Pastor freezing.
of process of enlightenment from end to the beginning and from the beginning to the end. We have to see the both sides. Enlightenment is only in relation to non-enlightenment. Nirvana is only in relation to samsara. Nirvana itself has no meaning. This was explained before. Samsara itself has no meaning. The meaning is what we experience now is the combination ordinary people. We cling to ignorance as something real. Ignorance is very real for non-enlightened people. When we become enlightened, no we have still all kinds of defilements, but because they are not real, we understand they are not real, so we do not cling to them. So we are much more at ease than an ordinary person who still believes this ignorance, this object we perceive in the world, in the person, is something to hold to, it's something real, and it is our world and everything that we know. When we have realized the object of enlightenment, be it individual enlightenment or common enlightenment for bodhisattva, that is the nature of the mind. If we are disciples, we realize it by vipassana, by direct vision of nirvana. Nirvana is still far, but we have seen it. Because we have seen it, we know this base, which is our mind connected to the body, is not so real. So we have attachment, but it does not lead to strong grasping. We have aversion, but it does not lead to hate. So we don't accumulate much karma. We accumulate very little karma and purify. This is entering into the stream, is entering into the process of purification. When the disciple is purified, he destroyed the base, which are the 5 aggregates based on mind, differentiating mind. He differentiates correctly. So he is out of accumulation of karma, and he has penetrated the falsity of karma. But he has penetrated it on a base of right differentiation. Now we want to study the bodhisattva path. The right differentiation is still and can still be object of attachment. We want to destroy all attachment in order not to live in the polluted mind, but to live in a pure mind only. But then still a problem arises: to whom does this pure mind belong? Why this pure mind? Can it still have some habits, or is it free from habits? This is a problem the Buddhists faced, and they solved it by non-dualistic approach. And what is a non-dualistic approach? The study of the mind of Buddha. In order to understand the non-dualistic meditation, we have to study not only the mind of the beings, but also the mind of the Buddha. The study of the mind of the Buddha is the main subject matter of non-dualistic meditation. You don't find it in Theravada, but you find also the Jatakas, which are the base for study of the mind of Buddha. We practice perfections, and perfections, if they are based on differentiation, they are not yet perfect. Based on non-differentiation, and non-differentiation is based on compassion, understanding compassion. Then we decide to stay in nirvana, in samsara, but not to be polluted by our tendencies. Not to be polluted by our tendencies is to see these tendencies as not being real. And that is non-dualistic meditation. Whatever is based on causes and conditions cannot be real. That is non-dualistic. And the Buddha starts the dependent origination with the explanation of that everything starts in the world with ignorance. Because of ignorance, we consider this mind, which is always moving, Liu Juan, as something real. Because we consider it as something real, then we also consider the objects that are objects of the moving mind as something real. We consider the people and we consider the things of being something real. The disciple who wants individual realization, he considers only persons not to be real. If you want non-dualistic realization, not only persons, but especially the things, all objects are not real. All objects are not real. Nirvana is not real. Samsara is not real. And because all objects are not real, all differentiations are just mind. This is non-dualistic approach. The other, these are the three suchness according to non-dualistic tradition, which the disciple does not need to see. The other things that the disciple sees and that the bodhisattva should see very clearly are the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths, bodhisattva must see very clearly, the disciple must see very clearly to become realized. But for the bodhisattva, the Four Noble Truths is not enough. He has to understand also that this mind which is moving is not separated from suchness, is suchness. And the object that this mind sees is also suchness. And that this differentiation is also suchness. And that the disciple does not need to see. For him is enough to see as suchness the Four Noble Truths. For the Bodhisattva, not enough. So according to the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, for Bodhisattvas there are 7 kinds of suchness. For the disciples, there are only 4 types of suchness. The truth of suffering, the truth of cause of suffering, the truth of end of suffering, and the truth of the cause of the end of suffering, the middle path. For the Bodhisattva, this is not yet perfect. Perfect is understanding that the mind which moves is not a real mind. So samsara and nirvana cannot be different. Is it clear now?
Better, Pastor. Pastor, when you mentioned about continuity of the mind, is it the same with the moving mind?
Yes.
And then
We will come to it today. This is the subject matter of today's lecture. This continuity of the mind is also illusion, but not for us, for a realized bodhisattva. When we become non-dualistically realized, when we have attained the pramudita bhumi, the first bhumi of the bodhisattva, then we see always that this moving mind is just an illusion. For us, in our present condition, we are not yet realized bodhisattvas. We are still bodhisattvas practicing by determination. When we are more realized, when we have unshakable faith, then we realized in terms of this unshakable faith. So we also don't see, it will come in our text also, we also don't see like the disciple, we do not see any person being real, but we still see objects and subjects. But the realized bodhisattva who has attained the bhumi, that's why attaining the bhumi is much more difficult than attaining the object of liberation, being nirvana. Most of the bodhisattvas, almost all, they are not the bhumi bodhisattvas, not the bodhisattvas who have realized the illusion of the moving mind. They are bodhisattvas by practice, if they are really advanced, or by faith, which is most of us. We practice non-dualistic meditation, non-dualistic approach to our daily practice due to faith, because we have understood that this is the ideal approach, which can, when we understand it, that's why the emphasis so much on understanding, on awareness. When we understand that all differentiations cannot be real. So this is why, especially in Tibetan tradition, but in Chinese tradition also, especially the Xianzang school, is so much importance on understanding, on awareness. When awareness is not enough, we immediately identify with our object. It's very difficult not to identify with it.
So when we have a faith in this the 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 Buddha nature that always available and already here in us. When we practice, there is a feeling like when in Chan we practice Wato, that means we instead of we when we are practicing, instead of the feeling, instead of we applying the method, the we always return to the state before the mind moves. So it is like go back to the beginning. While if we
uh, actually, let me explain. The awareness is when the mind moves,
yes,
it still does not lose its nature. Hmm? When it does not mean we have to stick to the mind which does not move. This is a big fault. This is not correct. This is in Zen, it is called the dead Zen, dead end Zen, and due to that, people become very confused. When I was in China, hmm, lived, there are many people who believe because they have not studied enough, they have not met a realized teacher, they think they have some enlightenment. Hmm? Because they identify with non-thinking, and non-thinking is real and thinking is unreal, but still they keep on getting angry, they keep on doing all kinds of things which are not not really ethical and not really in concentration and awareness, because they don't study, they have no clear understanding. When we think, it is a challenge to use this awareness. This is why I told you all kinds of stories to understand it. When we behave improperly, we already lost the non-dual nature of the mind. So I told you, like when I came to Taiwan from Theravada tradition, being Theravada monk. So I become kind of very friendly with Master Shen and discussed with him. And Master Shen then encouraged me to study. And then when I was eating, next to me was a history teacher making all kinds of sound while eating. Then in my thinking, dualistic thinking, correct differentiation, I think the doing this is wrong. So when I do that, I don't understand. I don't understand that this kind of mind does not is not independent. It's my judgment, and judgment is never independent. It depends on causes and conditions. Now the causes and conditions have changed. I am not in the Sangha in Sri Lanka or in Burma. I am in Taiwan. It's the Buddhist Institute. Situation is completely different. So there is nothing fixed in the mind. Only fixed is what we put in it, and that's how we fix it. So this awareness is very, very important for non-dualistic mind. Nothing is fixed in the mind. What is fixed in the mind is based on the continuity of the mind, which always changes according to causes and conditions. This is very important. So shall we come to our lesson?
yes, Fasen. Thank you very much, Fasen.
So let me read my translation. So now we come to very important passage in the scripture, and that is, it is entitled the causes and conditions. Hetu Pratyaya Yin Yuan of the impermanent mind. Impermanent mind is samsara. In this tradition, and in Chinese, Shen Mie means impermanent mind, and also the same word for samsara. The samsara is nothing but the impermanent mind. But because we don't see it, we don't understand. We don't understand, so we think that this impermanent mind is a person. But this impermanent mind was never a person. It was always causes and conditions. We don't see it. When we become enlightened, we see it only partly. But we see it partly based on correct differentiation. But from the non-dualistic perspective, the correct differentiation is still based on the continuity of the mind. It has not yet destroyed the idea that this continuity of the mind is this our habits which make the mind continuous is something real. So the text say, 夫子生灭因缘止，所谓众生以心以意识转苦。Very important. I have translated the causes and conditions of samsara. This is our impermanent mind, is namely based on chitta being transformed. Chitta means shin. Chitta means mind. Being transformed into manas. Manas means E. Manas means and chitta is mind, but chitta is mind from which the thinking comes. So the mind is transformed into something which is moving by manas. Manas is, so to say, the organ of thinking. Now, if you know the Xuanzang tradition, the Yiqie Shetilun tradition, which is so wonderful, then you know that the manas is that which observes according to Stiramati, which observes alaya and takes it for the self. According to Xuanzang tradition, the manas is that which observes the subjective aspect of samsara, of the alaya, and takes it for the self. The subjective aspect is the perceiver. Because the mind moves, there is the perceiver. And this subjective mind here in this tradition is explained as a process, the subtle process of transformation. The chitta is transformed into something which moves by manas. This is this tradition. It is different from the Xuanzang tradition in which the tathata never changes. But here the tathata is changing in its form, but in its essence, it always remains the same. That's why this explanation of the causes and conditions of samsara, of the mind which is changing, comes after explaining that the sameness and difference. Sameness and difference exist together. Sameness is in terms of the true mind. Difference is in terms of the mind which has an object. The mind which has an object becomes many, 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 many innumerable forms. The mind which does not have an object, as long as it does not take an object, it remains always the same. No matter whether it is what kind of mind. That's why we had this mirror, an explanation of the purity of the mind and the unthinkable function of the mind. When the mind does not move, it has the purity and unthinkable function, but it moves and it cannot stop moving unless we have come to the beginning. So this is why in even the Vasubandhu, even the Asanga, the same like in the scripture, the consciousness only the Buddha has fully realized. Even the enlightened bodhisattvas in high stages of realization have not fully realized consciousness only. Because consciousness is always a base. Without this base, nothing is there. And this base is always the same. But the objects always changing, always changing. As soon as there is object, there is impermanence. That is why this training I have got in Sri Lanka, in Burma, very useful, because when you are in dhyana, it is like there is no impermanence. But when you investigate the mind in dhyana, it is also appearing and disappearing every moment. So it has seemingly no continuity, but actually it arises from continuity. Every mind arises from continuity. As long as we don't become the highly enlightened person. When we attain the 8th stage of realization, our mind does not move, so we move the objects, as the Surangama Sutra says. As long as we are not highly realized, like Ashwagosha, the Taishi Tasha sings that Ashwagosha has attained the 8th stage of realization. His mind never moves, but he can move the minds of others and the things that the others see. This is very high realization. We are very far from it. So our mind that we experience is the process of transformation. And we understand this process of transformation. First, there is a mind. When the mind starts moving, it becomes the karma vijnana. It becomes the yesha. The karma vijnana is based on mind. It is already the mind which is moved by karma. Karma means by ignorance. But only Buddha fully realizes it. So he stays in the beginning. In the beginning, as Huineng says, there was nothing. So where can the dust settle down? And this is the understanding. This is a practice of Zen. Our mind moves, but at the same time, when it moves, we know it is moving due to ignorance. It has not the nature of moving. So in the mind itself, there is no this and that. This and that comes when the mind moves, and it moves due to karma. When it moves, it becomes manas. Manas explain the continuity of the mind. And when there is manas, on the base of manas, on the base of moving mind, we then judge, discriminate what we see, what we experience. This we want, this we don't want, this we do, this we don't do. And that is already gross mind, discriminating mind, which comes from the very subtle mind, which is explain the continuity. And this is here called manas. So when the mind moves, the chitta becomes manas, and the manas becomes discriminating consciousness. Vijnana. So when the mind moves due to karma, chitta moves, it becomes manas. When it becomes manas, then if we are not enlightened and we do not see that this is continuity of the mind, then we identify with the object as something which is there, which did not come from the mind. And then we judge, and according to our judgment, we act without seeing that this judgment is just continuity of the mind. And this continuity of the mind comes from manas, from individualizing mind. When the mind has continuity, it is already individual. And on the base of individual mind, we then pass judgments. And based on the judgments, we then cling, but we actually cling to concepts. We don't cling to reality, because we do not see that this reality comes from the mind itself. So this is very important for understanding Vaishya tradition, the mind-only tradition. And we have understood this mind-only tradition as the tradition of alaya consciousness, the impermanent mind explaining dependent origination, and the true consciousness, the Tathagata Garbha, which is hidden in us, sentient beings. And this consciousness never changes, but the objects of this consciousness always changes, but they do not lose the root. They lose the gen, which is never moving, but they never lose the root, because when something moves based on dependent origination, it moves already on the base of this as compared to that. When there is this as compared to that, this as compared to that comes from the mind itself. In the beginning, it was not there. So in the beginning, there is no place for any dust to settle. When the dust is already there, ignorance is there. Now he explains. So, in other words, the process of samsara is the process of transformation or of flowing. In Chinese, this transformation is called Liu Zhuan. Liu Zhuan. We are nothing but the Liu Zhuan. We are the mind which moves. When we identify with this mind which moves, which we do, then we identify with manas. When we identify with manas, we judge according to the continuity of our mind. So that's why everybody pay attention to different objects. Everybody pay attention to different objects because everybody has a different habits, different continuity of the mind, different seats in the mind, vasanas, sichi. But we do not see that these are already our continuity of the mind. This continuity of the mind is not real. We don't see it. So we need Ashwagosha to explain, and he explains. So, what does this all mean? That means that based on alaya, he does not translate. He says aliye, aliyesha, based on alaya, based on the mind which dwells in the world, which sticks to the world. We explain that there is shuo yo wu ming. There is ignorance. So that alaya arises based on ignorance. This, but the essence of alaya, which we do not see, never changes. But it arises, and when it arises, it's already it takes that this mind which moves is something real. We don't see that it moves based on karma. Then we identify with this karma because puchye archi, because we don't understand that this ignorance arises without our being aware of it. This is our problem. When the mind moves, it arises due to ignorance, and we are not aware of it. Puchye archi. This ignorance arises because we don't have a strength of awareness. Because we don't have this strength of awareness, what will happen? There will be a perceiver, Mengqian, and there will be what the perceiver perceives, that is Mengxian. This, so Lankavatara Sutra, this text is very deeply related to Lankavatara Sutra. When we turn to the object as something which is there, in the chitta, is object is still not really there. Only when it moves, the objects will be there. So the process of differentiation, anything starts with attention. When we have attention, then already there is karma vijnana. There is the karma. But the Buddha does not need attention. That is why it's so important to study the mind of the Buddha. Buddha does not need attention. When we have attention, so without our knowing it already, there is ignorance. And when there is ignorance, then there is differentiation. And this differentiation happens as the aspect of perceiver, which is called in Xuanzang tradition, Tian Xiang, the aspect of perceiver, the aspect of the subject, aspect of one who sees, and Neng Xian. Immediately, when there is a perceiver, there is something to be perceived. If there is no perceiver, there is nothing which can be perceived. Then this aspect of perceiver is called avarjana, avarjana vijnana, Zhuan Shi. And this aspect of what is perceived is called kyati vijnana, the xiang shi. So avarjana vijnana, the mind which moves, it moves based on karma. And karma is our ignorance. When it moves, it develops because it will manifest the object as something separate from the subject. But the separation happens in the mind itself. And in alaya vijnana stage, we are still able to know that it appears in the mind itself. So in the commentaries, this applies here also. This we understand that the mind which is true, when we have deep awareness, mind which is true, it never moves. The mind which moves is unreal moment by moment. This is non-dualistic awareness. It is unreal moment by moment. So this is the samadhi which this scripture is teaching, the samadhi of one samskara, Yixing Sanmei. Yixing Sanmei is the samadhi of when the mind moves and when the mind does not move. They actually are always Genru. The mind is always Genru. When it does not move, it is Gen. When it moves, it never loses the Ru. So when there is object in the mind, automatically, which we do not see, that's why Pu or Qi, without being aware of it, there is already one who perceives and what is perceived. And that happens all in the mind. It does not happen anywhere else, but in the mind only. That is why Vaisha, we cannot leave the Vaisha. We always have to understand this, everything is happening in the mind. That is why, explained in the beginning, the one mind is the Dharma. The mind which does not move is Dharma. The mind which moves is Dharma. This Dharma is fully revealed in the state of the Buddha, but is step by step revealed in the process of growing awareness. The process of meditation is a process of growing awareness. This growing awareness is, for this is very important to use the differentiating mind. But in this tradition, the differentiating mind has to be linked to the non-differentiating mind. And this non-differentiating mind is in this tradition called pragya, projet. And any realization of the disciple and realization of the bodhisattva, say the projet polo meeting, the sutras of great wisdom, they are not based on discrimination, they are based on non-discrimination. So, but the Shravaka's non-discrimination is not yet perfect in this tradition, because the samsara is always opposed to nirvana. He does not see that samsara and nirvana can only exist in mutual relation. So whenever there is an object, this object appears in mind. When the object appears in mind, it is due to karma consciousness. When there is karma consciousness, just like a snail, snail, when it touches something, immediately these two antennas appear, the perceiver and the perceived. And this all happens in the mind itself. It does not happen outside the mind. Nothing exists outside the mind. Without the mind, what can be perceived? What perceiver can there be? So when the mind moves, in case of Buddha, it is very clear. It moves because it is subjected to ignorance. In our case, we don't see that mind starts moving in the mind itself due to ignorance, which manifests as the karmic mind. For that, we need perfect realization. So once the mind has transformed into manas, into a continuity, then there will be a grasping to the objects. Meng Qu Jin Jie. Jin Jie means something which arises from the manas, which arises from the continuity of the mind. The real object arises from the continuity of the mind. If we don't have continuity of the mind, if we don't have the manas, we will never perceive any real object. We perceive real object because we have the continuity of the mind. This continuity of the mind is individual. So because we don't perceive consciously that this perceiver and the perceived appears in the mind itself, in which mind? In the chitta, in the alaya. So we don't see how this our mind, impermanent mind, is based on manas, on our individual experience, on the bijas, on the seeds in our consciousness, which are our habits accumulated in innumerable existences on the base of ignorance. Then we get the idea that what we see on the base of manas is the real gochara, is the real gochara, gochara chie. Chie means dhatu, the element of real object. The element of real object has never been there, but arises from the manas, from the individualizing consciousness. And this individualizing consciousness gives rise to the continuity of Nien, continuity of thinking, continuity of memory. And due to this continuity of memory, there is manas. So this manas is a subtle, but it is the base for the samsara of beings. But we, non-enlightened beings, we don't see it. We don't see that we are just a continuity of the impermanent mind, which we identify with a person. And so we cling to oneself, and we cling to others, and we cling to things as really something being there, rather than something being the creation of our own mind due to our previous karma, which karma means accumulation of samskaras, accumulation of will formations, accumulation of tendencies, based on the bijas, on the seeds in our mind, which we either strengthen by clinging to concepts and clinging to persons and things, or we weaken by developing more and more awareness how this bondage has come about. So in this tradition, the alaya is the origin of all the phenomena. And alaya is the mind which dwells in the world. Without the mind which dwells in the world, which literally sticks to the world, no phenomena arises. That means no real phenomena arises. Then, because we unconsciously give rise to the idea of the mind which dwells in the world as something real. So we have continuity of phenomena based on alaya, based on the mind which dwells in the world. So this continuity of phenomena based on alaya, they then make these bijas, these seeds, dwell in the consciousness, and we then evaluate our experience based on these seeds, which for us, so to say, transform our consciousness to the phenomena which we believe are really there. Then, because of that, the manas that gives rise to the consciousness, individual consciousness, which then gives rise to clinging to views. This should be like this, should not be like this, to judgments. This is the only way. Everything else on alaya, then we can also understand that our judgments and our clinging are not real. And when we understand our judgment and clinging are not real, then we can understand that this continuity of the mind is also not real. So that this mind, as has been explained before, which moves, is like instead of going westwards, it goes eastwards, and it is lost. It is lost where? It is lost in consciousness, based on ignorance, which then in this tradition pervades the Tathagata Garbha, the real consciousness, the Jen, which then manifests as Ru due to ignorance. But this Jen, this true nature of the consciousness, still does not get lost. So that is why it's so important when the mind moves to be aware by giving rise to judgments and giving rise to excessive attachment. So the judgments and attachment should be checked by understanding the unreality of the individual mind. This is the meditation here. This is a meditation in Zen. This training of Zen, which I have also undergone to some extent, is all based on that. Mind always arises due to causes and conditions. And these causes and conditions are real in the moment by moment. Only moment by moment. What is real in that moment must not be real in the second moment. So moment by moment, not allow this real mind leave this rule, this suchness aspect. Then the mind which moves and the mind which does not move, eventually in non-dualistic meditation, they bring us to one reality. There is only one reality. That's where we started. Ishin, only one reality, one mind. There are not two realities. The mind which moves and the mind which does not move, they are one whole. They are not different. This is very difficult to understand. And for understanding that, we need the Bodhisattva realization. The Shravaka realization in this tradition is not enough. In Bodhisattva realization, everything is unreal, which is related to causes and conditions. So we react as Master Shenyan always emphasized, as the true teacher of Zen always emphasizes, the mind always arises mind by mind, moment by moment, in a different situation. But we take this different situation as being one continuity because we have not penetrated the non-dual. It does not come from outside. That's why it is so important to understand the mind as transformation. In the mind, in Chitta, originally there is no this and that. This and that arises because the mind moves. Mind moves on the base of karma. When it moves, there is a perceiver and the perceived. When there is perceiver and the perceived, we get the illusion that there is an object, as opposed to the mind itself. When we believe that there is an object as opposed to the mind itself, then we get involved in views and attachments, which we consider to be connected to some true self. So Based on the commentaries explain that the suchness is the hetu, is the cause, and the ignorance is a condition. Because of the cause and conditions, we stay in alaya. Because we stay in alaya, we don't understand that this continuity of the mind is not real. And because we don't understand the continuity of the mind not being real, we think that the objects outside are real. When we think that the objects outside are real, so we indulge in views and attachments. But we don't see in our conditions that these views and attachments, they are based on the continuity of the mind, which is manas, which is a base for samskara, individual mind, our seats in consciousness. Let us see the time. Well, before we go to the this part is very, very important. So maybe we should finish here. Then the text continues that this continuity of the mind, which is called manas, has 5 names. So E, remember, there is Shin, Chitta, there is E, manas, and there is Sh, consciousness. Now, we are talking about the manas as being the base for our continuity of the mind. And this manas in this tradition, it is very different from Xuanzang's tradition, has 5 names. And the first name is called Ye Shi, the karma consciousness. This karma consciousness is based on chitta. Without a chitta, chitta means that which thinks, chintati iti chittam, and that which accumulates, chinoti iti chittam. That which accumulates and that which thinks, it is a mind. And that is precisely the function of the manas, which is very subtle. And because we don't see, we identify with this individualizing mind. And this individualizing mind starts with the karma consciousness. And the karma consciousness is when the object appears in the mind. So due to ignorance, without beginning, but it can have an end when we become fully enlightened Buddhas. Due to ignorance, Wu Ming Li, due to the Shakti, due to the power of ignorance, the mind moves without being aware of it. Without being aware of what? Without being aware that it moves due to karma consciousness. It is not the nature of the mind to move. It is the nature of karma, to power of karma to make the mind move. This is a very, very subtle state of realization. When we see it completely, then we are ready to become fully enlightened Buddhas. We can see in so-called very wonderful stage this mega being in the cloud. Being in the cloud, nothing is real. So just like the Mahapragya Paramita Sutra, the Sutra of the Great Wisdom explains, we beings, we are like those who believe in reality of the mist. We believe that mist in the mountains is really there. But when we are in the middle of the mist, when we are in the clouds, there is nothing we can grasp. Absolutely nothing. And this is a very high stage of realization. This is when we are ready to become fully enlightened Buddhas. But let us finish here. We are just finishing with understanding that when the mind moves, it moves due to nimitta, due to picture. Nimitta has a meaning of picture. Nimitta has a meaning of object. Nimitta has a meaning of sign. When the sign appears in the mind, when the object appears in the mind in form of sign, that is perception of something being there, that is actually based on the mind itself, which starts moving. But in this mind itself, there is not yet any differentiation. There is not yet any object. The object comes due to this karmic consciousness. So let us finish here. We have already surpassed our time, more or less. So please study, repeat, see the previous things. If you have access to the text, please consult the text and see everything has meaning when we see it connected together as one whole. That is why this text is so wonderful, because always we have to think in relation. Non-enlightenment is in relation to enlightenment. Moving consciousness is in relation to non-moving consciousness. Ignorance is in relation to wisdom. And what we experience is just relation. And relation from the very beginning is not the nature of the mind. It comes from the mind itself. From which mind? From Chitta. The mind which thinks and the mind which accumulates. Very wonderful. So let us transfer merit for the benefit of all sentient beings, and let us study. This study is so wonderful. The more we appreciate it, the more humble we become and more receptive we become. Such deep teachings were transmitted to us and still exist. It is just incredible. 愿以自功德普济一切，我等一众生皆苦成佛道。May the merits of today's practice spread to all beings so that we attain the perfect realization, the non-dualistic realization. Okay, so we finished today, and please let me repeat. I did not yet say it clearly. Next week will not be on Sunday, but on Saturday. Saturday from 2:30 to 4 o'clock. We continue as usual. And the week after that also we continue on Saturday. And after that, we will make announcement for many of us, Saturday seems to be more suitable than Sunday. So we either keep it on Saturday or we change to Sunday according to what we have agreed with the organizers. But next week and the week after that will be on Saturday. Please remember. Saturday, 2:30 our time, Central European time. I think 7:30 in the Jakarta time, and 8:30 Hong Kong time or Taiwan time. Indian time, I'm not sure, but that will be easy to find out. Okay, see you next